Welcome to the Oaktree Institute Podcast, the podcast designed to empower Muslim leaders through education and skill development. In this episode of the Oaktree Institute Podcast, we welcome our guest, Zahra Billoo. She's a civil rights attorney and the Executive Director of the Bay Area chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. She facilitates training and workshops as a part of CAIR's grassroots efforts to empower American Muslims on building bridges with allies on civil rights issues. Her work has been highlighted in local and national media outlets, including MSNBC and NPR. She's one of the leading Muslim women figures in the country. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Zahra, for joining us on this episode.
Wa alaikum assalam. I'm happy to be here. Happy to be talking to you in the new year.
May Allah bless you. We really appreciate your time and taking a couple minutes from your day to share some insights with us. So I guess we wanted to start a little bit about your current role as the Executive Director at CAIR. We wanted to kind of walk through your day-to-day and leading the CAIR chapter in the Bay Area and what what is your work like when you're grinding every day?
Yeah. What do I do? Every day is different from the next, which is one of my favorite things about this job is that I can't say I'm bored because literally every day is different from the next. So in my role as the Executive Director of CAIR San Francisco Bay Area, this is the oldest CAIR chapter in the country. So they started CAIR National, and then the first regional chapter office that was opened was right here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we're also the third largest. And so there's 17 of us here in the San Francisco Bay Area with the mission of promoting justice, enhancing the understanding of Islam, and empowering American Muslims. And it's a challenging time to do any of that in. For anyone that thought that Islamophobia was bad in 2008 or 9, when I first started, we eat our words now because in 2020 we have a openly white nationalist president in office. But it's also fun to do it in this region because this is the most progressive region in the country, right? So what would I do if I didn't have a pastor with, a funny mustache trying to burn a Quran in my backyard every day? Well, I get to answer that question here. We do things like pass facial recognition bans and have lots of cities and counties recognizing Muslim Appreciation Month. And so overall, it's a dynamic job at a difficult time in a really receptive region. On average, I would say my days, even when they're different, I do a mix of things. So I manage the staff, right? So I'm constantly in check-in meetings, supporting newer, younger folks, and as well as seasoned folks who are doing things like direct casework. So they are providing legal services to people who are facing discrimination. They are managing advocacy campaigns and asking questions around how we get more Muslims to participate in the census. So I do a lot of just supporting our team. I also have to fundraise, right? Everyone's favorite thing in any nonprofit job is
absolutely.
One of my key responsibilities is to fundraise, is to ask people for money to keep our doors open, to pay the salaries. And in 2009, when I started, I was fundraising for my salary. And now, in addition to that, I have to fundraise for everyone else's. And I appreciate that, is that it gives me the opportunity to go to the community and say you value this work. Now, put your money where your mouth is.
Here we are.
And then, of course, another major component of my work is outreach. And the outreach is internal and external. So meeting with interfaith partners about the issues in our community, meeting with elected officials and key stakeholders in corporate America around, hey, this is how what you're doing impacts us, as well as inside. Actually, one other external is other civil rights partners, right? So for a long time, Muslim issues have been very siloed. We have a lot of allies in the legal sector, people who are not Muslim, who are not from Muslim majority countries, but know that if Muslims are targeted and harassed, that everyone else can be too. So I do a lot of work with our legal partners, and then a lot of outreach inside the community. I still meet people who, and this is embarrassing for me, who don't know what CAIR is. I also meet people who don't know what their rights are, who routinely face harassment and don't complain about it. And so we do a lot of outreach inside the community because that's where empowering American Muslims comes from, is that knowledge is power. And we want to make sure that the knowledge isn't just held in the CAIR staff, that people know how to take care of themselves, how to protect themselves.
I love that. That's some amazing work, and a lot of extremely important, valuable things for the Muslim community. And I think we all really appreciate the amazing work of CAIR, and of course, the chapter that you lead. That's one of the flagship chapters for CAIR. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you got here? So, it's some amazing things that you're doing. What is your own personal journey? How did you move towards being a national figure, a leader in the Muslim community, outspoken woman, speaking on behalf of Muslims? How did that all come about? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you say like national leader, I'm like, no, that wasn't part of the plan. I still don't know when exactly it happened. I grew up in a really practicing Muslim home. Like I tell people this and they don't believe me. We went to the masjid 6 days a week. I kid you not. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Like we were working class in many years. Some years we were upper middle, but like we couldn't afford to go to Islamic school. And so my parents' solution to that was, okay, we'll go to public school and then finish your homework and then we go to the masjid. Right. And so I did that, I think, through middle school. And then in high school, I went less as I got rebellious. And I think as I started to face questions around the way the mosque was treating women or why our room was smaller and we could never see the imam, like those kinds of things. But the masjid was such an important part of our life growing up, as was our relationship with the Quran and the Sunnah. Like we didn't read Disney stories growing up. Like my mom, like our bedtime stories were the stories of the prophets, peace be upon them. It was really important to my parents that we spent a significant amount of time memorizing parts of the Quran. And so that was our upbringing. It wasn't an activist upbringing by any means, but they laid the foundation so that when I then came across like the ideas of social justice when I was in college, it like resonated immediately. It became second nature. Like it aligned with the foundation. I was 17 when 9/11 happened. So I was 17 when 9/11 happened. I was a freshman in college. And at 36 now, I'm 36. And so I've spent more time on this side of 9/11 than on the other side.
Yeah.
But it was a really formative time in my life where, for the first time I was worried about my safety wearing hijab. I had to speak out at campus protests because a lot of the other MSA students were foreign students who were nervous about that. I built relationships with administrators. We had one in particular who I still see at community events, a Japanese American elder who had been a baby during World War II. And so a lot of that, seeing the imams in our region get rounded up and arrested, and we would protest outside of those detention facilities or special registration. And then, of course, resident to the beginning of this year is our invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so all of that happens for me between 17 and 19. I'm involved in my MSA. I'm involved in my student government, campus progressives. We always knew I would be a lawyer because, as you can tell, I'm talking and I'm not stopping to take a breath. I don't know how you or your editors will deal with that, but that was me even as a kid. So I already knew I would be a lawyer, but I didn't know what kind of lawyer necessarily. And so this is what puts me on the path to social justice lawyering. I came across CAIR at that time too. For listeners of yours who are college students, one of my unsolicited recommendations is go do an internship at CAIR, at Mass, at any other advocacy or community organization. So I interned at CAIR Los Angeles, which is our biggest office in the country, even today. And I stayed in touch with them over the years. Fast forward, I went on to law school. Eventually I thought that I would do employment law. That was I think maybe coming from a working class family and seeing the impact of corrupt management, bad practices, discrimination. Yeah. I wanted to help people, right? I was okay, I speak English, I'm a lawyer, I'm a citizen, let me help the people who need help getting paid. And I could be really impactful as a visible Muslim woman, helping people who aren't Muslim, right? Living out my faith through action was what I had wanted to do. But this is the not exciting part. I graduated when the economy had crashed. And so even though a whole bunch of us had visions about where we would apply for work, we applied far more broadly. So I never thought I would work in the Muslim community that I had interned at CAIR, but I also was doing things like interning at the union. But I applied to CAIR because they had an opening. And it was the perfect storm again. Like I was desperate for a job, and they could only afford like a recent graduate to be their director. That was in 2009. I took the bar exam in California, and I started work at this CAIR chapter like the next week after that. At that time, it was me and one part-time person. I think we had a budget of like maybe $200,000.
Wow.
Today, alhamdulillah, there are 17 of us with several openings and a budget that is now close to 10 times.
Wow, mashallah.
And so it's been such a blessing. One of my mentors had said, it's really important that you always have a plan. And I had planned my life, kindergarten through Juris Doctorate. Like I knew exactly how I was getting to law school. I was going to be a lawyer by 25. But he also said that it's important to recognize opportunities. And I can't think of a better opportunity than being able to come to work every day and being able to come to work every day at a place where I get to be my most full activist Muslim self.
That's amazing. I mean, that's an amazing story. I appreciate that you said you planned it all out. Like you saw it. I guess you didn't envision doing exactly what you're doing right now, but that's an amazing story, and that's an amazing journey.
I got to 25 and I didn't have a plan anymore. No, this is the problem.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And I planned it all out, and then the plan ended, and I was like, oh my God, the economy crashed. I graduated. I have loans to pay back. Happy to talk about like loans and what that means. But like, you know, like I have loans to pay back. Like my family expects me to like be self-sufficient at a certain point. Sure. What do I do? And this is where I think trust in Allah also matters, right? Is that we always talk about like tie your camel and then trust in Allah. And so when this opportunity came, I had tied my camel, and so I was ready to take the leap.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And so how is that all shaping your current work? Like in the Muslim community, what are you seeing in the Muslim community when it comes to the work that you do? Social justice work, advocacy work, really trying to stand up for Muslims when sometimes they're not standing up for themselves. What has been your experience in dealing with the broader Muslim community, or maybe even specifically with the leadership of the Muslim community?
It's a good question. As I talk to young people, the majority of them don't remember life pre 9/11, right? Like many of them were actually born afterwards. And so I think I say that to say that the community is really diverse. Like there are people in my generation and older who remember the crisis of 2001 to really like 2004, where you didn't know if your masjid was going to get raided. You didn't know if your imam would be there. You didn't know who was a FBI informant in your masjid. And, you know, we were just renewing our campaign, our war campaign in Iraq, and we were just starting it in Afghanistan. Today, when I talk to members of the Muslim community, you know, it's less and less likely that I get the like, oh, voting is haram. Like I see that less today. But I definitely see a lot of like, what's the point, right? Like we've been fighting for 20 years. What has changed, right? Mm-hmm. And when you see like nothing has changed, then people start to get frustrated and apathetic. And I see that across generations. But I also see that people are still feeling an urgent need, either because they know someone whose civil rights have been violated, or they're worried about what will happen if Trump, is reelected, or like how that all plays out. And so when we do our work, when I'm talking to people, I'm pushing them, on two levels, I would say. One is that we absolutely have to have faith, right? Like that we know that the example I always give is the reason I can do some of the really bold, seemingly dangerous things that I might do is because I am choosing to surrender to the belief that no harm comes to me unless Allah wills it, right? And so I don't want to just sit at home on my sofa and like get hurt because I fell on a knife. Like if I'm getting hurt, I'm getting hurt with dignity, right? Like something good happened, or it was in the process of something. So really pushing people to have faith, right? And to remember also that no good comes to us unless Allah wills it, right? We could elect a Democratic president, and we could have the same circumstances we did with Obama, where everything stayed the same. And so we have to first and foremost ground ourselves in that. And then the second part of what I'm pushing people on is to take action, right? Is that our faith is not a passive faith. Our faith is a active faith. Over and over again, whether we're talking about, being moved to worship as action or actually the activist as action, right? To give charity, to speak out against injustice, all of those things, we have to do them. And we have to do them, I think often in the context of fundraising, because that's so much of what I have to do, but like we have to do them to a place of at least slight discomfort. Yeah. And I had a conversation with someone today who is an interfaith activist, and he was like, no, I'm not complicit in what the US government does because I didn't vote for, in that context, Bush, right? I didn't vote for Bush. And I was like, yeah, but you pay your taxes, right? But I didn't vote for Bush. And it's like, yes, but every time you pay your taxes, you choose your comfort over someone else's liberty, literally over someone else's limbs. And I'm not telling people that they should like go around not paying their taxes. I pay my taxes, right? But like, I'm comfortable. I don't like, I earn less money because I work at a nonprofit than if I did in corporate, right? Like, yes, it sucks when someone writes a hit piece about me, but I'm sitting here being like, I'm still generally comfortable. Like the last time I felt like hardship wasn't recent. And so pushing our community towards like principled, but also bold and courageous action. Yeah. And I find that people are willing. I think that where we sometimes don't go all the way as leaders is that we don't give people things to do. Right? So like if I approached every crisis from the perspective of not how could I solve this, but rather how could I engage my community in solving this, like how much would that shift around so much of what we are working on?
I really want to emphasize on this point. So I love this point because I wanted to ask you about how do you do that? How do you motivate people to be standing up for justice, to be aware? How, I think we have this apathy towards just action in general, right? Taking action in almost in anything. So in terms of what have you seen has really mobilized people to take action? And that's a great point. So you're kind of giving like a little strategy that I guess you've seen that really works when you engage them towards something. What does that mean? Can you speak to me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think on the leaders front, so what we need to be thinking about at a leadership level is, so I want people to take action. How do they take action? Right? Like, am I opening the route for them to do that? I want people to be outraged about the U.S. Extrajudicial assassination of the Iranian leadership, right? Like, okay, great. Now what? So I go to someone at the masjid and I'm like, hey, like, I want you to do something about this. I need to be using my resources as a leader to say, here's the phone number to call. Here's the script, right? Here's the petition link. Here's the protest we're organizing. And I think that a lot of times we get frustrated as leaders because we're like, people aren't doing anything. It's like, well, did I give them something to do? And then did I make it easy? Did I make it accessible? Did I make it interesting? Did I make it social? And right, like I think once I'm moving them to action, then I guess what I find is that people, I'm trying to think through this, I find that some people don't take action because nobody tells them how, right? Or gives them the means to do it. Right. And then when we do that, what is our follow-up? Right? Because that's the second layer, right? So if I keep going to the gym, so like, okay, so I've gone to the gym 4 times in 2 weeks and I've been fasting and I'm trying to calorie count. Like, this is literally me personally, right? And I haven't lost a single pound. So tomorrow I'm going to go eat cake because like
you lose hope,
right? Like the action isn't working. So short of gymming with my like actual scale, right, which isn't going to give me a real answer, I think one of the things that leaders need to be thinking about, and if you apply this to activism, is like, okay, so you didn't get the big win. Like we didn't stop the war in Iran, but you know what? These 3 members of Congress spoke out against it when they wouldn't have otherwise. This is because of you. This is because of the action that you took. So you feed the energy, the adrenaline that the person got. Like I really enjoyed the fitness class that I took at the gym. Right? Someone has to tell me now that it was effective, that I accomplished something so that I go back.
Right.
And so that's where like, I don't know, I'm in like 2020 like diet mode. And so I'm like able to like apply that metaphor right over. But that's like, yeah, like I got on the scale this morning. I was like, oh, I didn't lose any weight after 2 weeks of trying really hard. And so if we were to think about activism in that way, right, where you actually have small wins, but leadership sometimes gets so bogged down or busy that we don't communicate those wins.
Correct. And I love that. And I think that's really important, just understanding the human psyche and how people work. Like if you don't engage them, like you mentioned, if they don't see the path, if they don't see what they're doing that's meaningful, if they don't know how to apply it, you really can't. It's just theories and concepts. And I think making it practical and real is something really important. What have you seen within Muslim organizations, community-based organizations, Masajid? Why aren't they helping or supporting? What are they struggling with when it comes to just creating this application of just mobilizing people?
I think it's capacity. Like
Okay.
I really like, so I'll use CAIR Bay Area as an example. So I have one office, 17 people. We serve 9 counties and 250,000 Muslims, right? We have peer organizations that are of comparable size that serve a fraction of the region, right? So we've got a lot to do, which makes it difficult to do a deep dive, right? I think about masajid, where, if you were to look at like churches and synagogues, like they have paid staff. How many of our communities masajid have paid staff, right? Aside from like the imam, maybe, right, who leads prayer but isn't necessarily a religious director or an outreach director.
Correct.
Right? Like the facility staff. And that's about it, right? Like where if you were to go to and there are some masajid that I think do this really well, where they have an executive director and they have an outreach director, they have those things. And then all of a sudden they can do more. So there is a part of me that thinks it really is just capacity.
Human capacity. The human capital, human resources.
We need, and something that, we haven't touched on, but I think about often is, do our community, elders, youngsters, does our community see community work as a viable career? People who are passing through in part-time jobs and just trying to I need this job to get something on my resume. Like I'm in, great. But I'm talking about long-term career in the community. We need both. And ideally the part-time jobs, I think about how my internship, eventually led me to becoming an executive director.
Right.
But do people see that as a viable career for themselves?
Yeah. So what are the challenges there? So we talk about one of our biggest challenges is this human capital. And I think the institutions that we have, they're either not investing in it, or there's not enough people coming up or coming forward to take that responsibility. So let's speak on both sides. I mean, let's continue on that point of why aren't young people dedicating careers to them? Or what have you seen? Or maybe what are your insights or advices on what can make people commit towards making that change in the community?
Right. So really quickly, just one other thing is, I think that the other reason that we don't see institutions moving is because there's always a crisis. I wanted to flag that also, is that even at CAIR with our resources, I'm like, oh my God, we're always in crisis mode. So how do we proactively build out engagement?
Right. Or think strategically, right?
Right. Is that if it actually impacts your psyche, there is no brain capacity left strategically or creatively when it's fire all the time. To your point about careers, you're right. It's a two-way street. So I would start with the community and the institutions before the young people. They have to fund the positions.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So I was just having a conversation with someone about our nonprofit, our Muslim nonprofit organizations even paying livable wages. And I think that in many cases they are not. People don't see that. I remember I was talking to someone, this is great. I don't know if you know this about me, but sometimes I tell you too much about my personal life, which I just did I told you about, I was on a diet. I was talking to someone for marriage a while ago, and they were working in a nonprofit. And they had said that if and when they got married, they would quit their job at the nonprofit and go back to the corporate sector. And I was like, I'm sorry, I think you must have me confused with some other of the women that you have considered, but that's actually not one of my criteria. Why would you, I think it's commendable that you have a career in this, I am not asking you to leave it. Why would you do that for your wife? And, the feedback was like the hours are too long and the pay is insufficient, right? And so fast forward to a couple recently at the Mass ICNA convention, someone asked this panel that I was on, like, why is it that it's difficult for, like, what is the holdup when people get married in making the sacrifices to support their partner in Islamic work, right? And one of the other speakers I thought tackled it really well. He said, well, that's the problem, is that we see it as a sacrifice rather than as like a commendable thing, right? Yeah. And some of that is because the circumstances are that if we're not paying people well, then it is a sacrifice, right? Yeah. If we are pushing forward work-life balance, then it is a sacrifice. If we're not thinking about employee wellness and like, one of the things that we think about with like people who've been in the work much longer than me is, do they have a retirement account? Like, what happens if you've worked for 30 years at a Muslim institution and it's now time for you to go? Like, did they put any money in your 401k? Like, what is that like? And so I think community has to be thinking about that. One of the examples that people give is, we pay doctors so much, but we trust imams with our children's hearts, like literally, right? And we underpay them. Like, how does that make any sense? Like, a relationship with a good imam versus a inadequate imam or someone who is actually toxic could change the trajectory of someone's life. The same is true for, like, I would pay a corporate lawyer $400, $500, $600 an hour to handle a merger, but the FBI is surveilling me and I want like free assistance, right? Or like, I get it for free because I donate to CAIR, but like, how much do I really donate to CAIR?
Yeah.
So that's the like community side of it.
Yeah.
And I think that if we could resolve some of these questions,
oh yeah,
right, really improve, then young people would see careers in this.
Absolutely. I think institutions definitely have to step their games up. Just thinking about hiring people, let alone obviously how to take care of them financially, benefits, all of these different things. Absolutely. That's a great point. How do you see the other side then from I guess, we can talk about why aren't young people or people in general. I know a lot of people that, alhamdulillah, I've made a career as well in the nonprofit field in the Muslim space. It's been my thing for a long time, but and I do see some people that are making that jump. They leave their corporate job, or people are doing that. Yeah. Why don't they sustain that? I feel as a burnout, attrition is high, retention is low. What is it about community leaders or community actors or people trying to get in that they need to know?
So what sustained me for 10 years, right, is an ongoing willingness to like keep my skills current, to negotiate for what I need, to make sure that I have like the right support system in place. So I'm like fortunate to have really supportive family, but we don't always choose our family. We do choose our friends, right? So my friends are people who volunteer with CAIR, organize with CAIR, donate to CAIR. And so that means that like I have people cheering me on, right? Like ensuring that, reminding me that what I do is important, even on the hardest of days. The other thing that I go back to is I started by talking about how my family and I went to the masjid 6 days a week. So like faith, really important part of driving my work. It is what brings me to work. I know that different people come to work for different reasons, but for me, knowing and believing that I do this for Allah and that I want to be able to say, Ya Allah, I did everything I could with everything I had, is how and why I keep showing up. But I forget that on days. Like, it's hard. Like, it's really hard when you're in the middle of like 16 performance reviews to be like, oh yeah, I'm doing this for a greater cause, right? Yeah. Or like when the budget starts to get tricky, why am I here crunching numbers so late at night? And so I really also credit my Mass Usra, or my Mass Usra. And for those that aren't familiar with an Usra, I think calling it a halakha might be an understatement. It's halakha plus, right? It's family. But we meet regularly. We have a curriculum. We have goals that are tied to our religious practice. And we have accountability in place. And so I've been in a regular Usra through Mass, I think for 12 years. So longer than I've been.
Wow,
And that's not the be all end all of like the religious practice that I have to engage in to stay grounded. But it's for sure a core that is consistent. And so I recommend that of people, is that I think that it significantly protects me from burnout. Right. And, there's all the like other like privileged things that I take vacations, and like once in a while I buy shoes, and, and I eat ice cream every day. Oh, you know what else I'll say that I do want to always make sure to say is I have a therapist. Mm-hmm. Like I go in and I talk to a mental health professional on a regular basis. I go in when, the thing about a regular appointment is that I go in when I'm feeling bad and gross and like down. I also go in when I'm feeling fine. Right. For maintenance purposes. I always compare it to like my Toyota Camry. Like my first car lasted me 16 years. And when I passed it on, it was totaled, but it was only cosmetically totaled, right? Which is like the worst way to lose a car, because a car is still functioning. Right. And I don't know if the new owner still has it, but last I heard it reached when I had it. So I had it from 2001 to 2016. And when I signed it over, it had over 330,000 miles on it.
Oh, mashallah.
Which is like absurd, right? Like it's unheard of. And my dad's a mechanic. So that's the thing, right? My dad is a mechanic, and he insisted that I have it routinely checked and maintained, not just when there was a problem, but on a regular basis. So like if we do that for the cars to get them to last that long, like why don't we take care of ourselves? And so I like a lot of the work in the Muslim community, whether you're in advocacy or in religious leadership or in any of these spaces, I actually feel it can be really traumatic. Yeah. Right. Either because there are so few resources in the community that it's like, I shouldn't be getting domestic violence stories. That's not what I do, but I get domestic violence stories occasionally. Right. Or like I get stories of people stuck in war zones. I experience discrimination in the community, right? Like I face trouble in my work. Like there's so many ways in which this work, subjects the people in it to, trauma and or secondary trauma. And so we need to be taking care of that. Yeah. So I really strongly recommend that people do that.
I really appreciate that. So those are three really good points. And I guess I could go them a little bit more in terms of as well your experience. So the USRA and USRA has been one of the most important things in my life as well. So it's definitely that support system from a mentor, somebody that's and a group that's really it's really a group support system that keeps you accountable, keeps you engaged. So that's super important. I really appreciated that you shared the mental health aspect, and I think that that's super important. I know it's still taboo. We talk a lot about mental health with a lot of the workshops that we do and the programs that we do. So that's definitely super important. And then the last thing, it felt like a little bit like, that idea of being resilient. These two things build your resilience in a lot of things that you'll deal with, a lot of the challenges that you'll do, because they'll come from every angle, like you said, a story of
inside, outside, yeah,
exactly.
Composed, like sometimes, like it is, naming that there are days where I wake up and I'm just tired and I'm unmotivated, right? And it's like hard to get out of bed, and so having these practices in place is both key to resilience, but I think also motivation, right? Is like going back to the question, why are we doing this?
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit too? So you were getting to that point about Muslim women leaders in our community, and mashallah, you're an extremely prominent one. There are very, very few, even though, and I'll say this because alhamdulillah, I've been able to work with a lot of different organizations and travel to a lot of different places. On the ground, it's mostly women leading on all the initiatives, right? From MSAs to community centers to youth groups to, you'll see that women are leading all the initiatives. But all of a sudden, when it comes to leadership positions or positions of authority, positions of decision making, we don't see women there. So can you speak a little bit to that, the challenges that you see and some of the remedies? I think more importantly, what are the things that women should do, and what are the things that quote unquote leadership should do to be able to integrate that really important part of the diversity and the dynamic abilities that we seem to shun sometimes?
So unfortunately, like women's leadership is something that is scant but it's not just in the Muslim community that it's scanned, right? That it's in like Fortune 500 companies,
Absolutely.
it's in government. And so some of what I'll say, I think applies more broadly. And I don't want it to be mistaken as like, she's hating on the Muslim community. No, like everyone has problems, right? It's a number of factors. One is where is old leadership already, right? So who has been in leadership for the last 20, 30 years before the last 15 as women start to become more visible, right? Using just like Muslim community organizations as an example. Do we subject Muslim women to higher standards than Muslim men? Like a conversation that comes up for me a lot around like speakers is, well, like she's not qualified, right? And then you look at the lineup of male speakers and you're like, wait, but like they don't have credentials either, right? And so we hold women to this higher standard. We also are socialized in a certain way where if women are too strong in their personalities, that's like considered abrasive or bullying, right? But at the same time, if she's too soft, she's never heard. She's never heard, particularly when she is the only woman in the room, when she's advocating a new idea, when she wants to change something. And so we're dealing with all of these like obstacles to move or amplify women's leadership. It is very much the case that in the past 10 years, I have, come across a number of issues from not being able to there are some masajids where I still can't speak because women don't speak at those masajids, right? There are certain circumstances where women workers and women speakers are paid less than their male counterparts. There are others where you're all sitting in a room and you're the only woman there and you're trying to break through the fact that all the men know each other and all pray Fajr together as you embrace an idea. Something else that comes up, I think, less for me in a professional setting, but definitely comes up, I think, in community organizations is, are we asking, actually, even for me in a professional setting, are we asking what are we doing to ensure that our spaces are inclusive, right? So if your meetings are at Isha, at some man's house in the basement, then you're not going to be able to recruit a lot of women to join, right? If the one or two women in the room always feel like they're being talked over, then they're not going to be able to recruit other women to join. And so I think there's, practices like that where even, I think people, and I don't know that it happens maliciously, nobody schedules a meeting after Isha in someone's basement thinking, oh, this might make it difficult for so-and-so to come, right? I don't have children, but I have mothers in my workplace. And, we sometimes grapple with questions of how do we provide you with a different kind of flexibility around your hours? Because childcare can sometimes be unpredictable, right? Do we, I know that there were a number of members of Congress and corporate leaders over the last couple of years. Actually, I think this happened with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib as she was being sworn in. She had her kids there with her, right? Are women encouraged to bring their kids to places if that's what their circumstances require?
Right.
How do we apply that in communities?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, these are amazing points. Some of them are definitely systematic issues in our society. I think some of them are definitely some kind of bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious at times, and then how we create inclusive spaces, how we engage, how we allow people to step up and take responsibilities. And I appreciate all that. What would you tell women then, sisters in the community? How do you continue to just grind through that, right? There's so many obstacles. How do you continue to grind through that? How do you advise others to continue to grind through that?
Really quickly, just one thing on the unconscious bias that you reminded me of is I've had a lot of conversations with really well-meaning men who for them, their bias is their blind spot. So they can't own that they might have an unconscious bias, right? And by the way that they carry male privilege, right? So it always gets me when somebody denies that they have male privilege or that women have equal access. And I'm like, wait, but why do you, as someone who doesn't have my experience and has ever walked in my shoes, feel okay telling me that my experience doesn't exist, right? That I do feel like I have to speak louder, that I do feel like it is harder for me to do certain things. And so, I know you asked me what I would say to women. What I would say to men is, be open-minded and curious. to learn about your biases and to hear from impacted people. In the same way that I would tell a white person, like, hey, like, stop telling the Black person that you don't have white privilege. Like, shut up and listen. Ask why it makes you uncomfortable, right? Like, learn more about what they are experiencing, and be an advocate. So for women, you know, it sucks, but we are subject to a higher standard, period. Right? Like, a number of women leaders have talked about how if some of the scandals around, you know, our male leaders and their secret marriages and their temporary marriages and their interactions with women, if you like flip the script on that, and if that were women leaders, right, who were having those scandals, you better believe that like we would not be back in the community touring and speaking and having the same access that some of these men continue to have despite their transgressions, right? And I'm not saying that we want women to have those issues. I'm just saying that it is a higher standard. We do have to work harder. And so I say that to women is like, recognize that we are under the microscope and it is harder for us to succeed, which does mean that we have to grind harder. So that's the first thing. The second thing I tell women is that women and others who are marginalized in different ways is it takes time, right? Like it takes so much time to break through some of these barriers. And so if you aren't, and so you have to be in it for the long game. Like there's a story about a mosque that I'm really close to now, but when I went to them in 2010 for the first time, we were giving a Know Your Rights presentation. It was a predominantly immigrant mosque, and the men sit downstairs, the women sit upstairs, and we were giving a Know Your Rights presentation on FBI interactions, which you might know mostly impact men, right? Yeah. But at the time, every single attorney in our region who was doing that work was a woman. So we get to this mosque to do a Know Your Rights presentation. We dressed conservatively because that's what we were like, dressed even more conservatively than you usually would. And we get led upstairs and we're like, oh, cool, this is to pray. And then we'll come down and do the presentation. And they were like, oh no, you're going to give the presentation from upstairs. So predominantly male audience, female speakers, we gave the presentation using a two-way microphone. Our translator, we had a translator too, he was downstairs. So like imagine like we are, for this recording, which is an audio recording, we are on video conference because like it helps, right? To actually like be able to see the person. So could you imagine giving a presentation to several dozen people who you could not see on a two-way microphone where your like translator is also in the other room? That was in 2010. We kept going back. Like we were like, so, I had a decision to make that day, right? Like throw up my hands and be like, this is absurd and backwards and I don't have time for this and I can't tolerate it, and leave, or do it. And I did it. Right. And the next year I went back and I was respectful of their like situation. And, we were like slowly pushing, right? Like we had like the men wanted to talk to us outside afterwards. So like we're slowly pushing and saying, hey, like this isn't a very effective way to do a presentation. We're going to accommodate you. I went back the next year and the next year and the next year. And I think it was like 2 or 3 years later that they had me do the presentation from the side of the men's room. So now I can see all the men and I'm standing at the side entrance of the men's prayer area, right? Which is progress because now they can see me. And then fast forward a couple of years and they, I was surprised when they did this. I didn't know they actually cleared the path and I walked to the front of the room and I gave the presentation. Like, because you would listen to a presentation at work from a woman, right? I'm dressed appropriately. Like it's like, there's nothing wrong with it. So I gave the presentation from the front of the men's prayer home.
Amazing.
The next year I hired a male staff member. We're an equal opportunity employer, so I can't put in gender preferences on my employees, but I like happened to like hire a male employee who was, doing some of this work. And so I sent him up. So I go back and I'm like, cool. Like, I know that we've had some progress and I'm really excited. And, I could stay at the front of the room, but I've got a male employee who could do this. So I'm going to stay at the side and, he'll handle it from the front. And they were like, no, Sister Zahra, like you can come up too. We want to hear from you as well. That took close to a decade, right? Of just like patient, actually, no, not close to a decade, because I've been speaking from the front of that room for 5 years. So 5 years. And so 5 years on my relationship with that mosque is about 10 years long.
Where do you get that grit from? Why does that happen?
I think it's in understanding my purpose, right? And like my purpose in that context is to ensure that as many of those people know their rights as possible. And so I have to get to them however I get it to them, right? If I leave, they don't get it at all. Right. If I bite my tongue and I don't mean like accept oppression. I mean, bite my tongue in that moment and then have a negotiation, an ongoing conversation, and invest in that relationship, it happens, right? Like,
right.
The same, the same could be said about any other setting where I think women have made space. That it's taken that we keep showing up. I think the other thing I would add, so one, I said work harder because it's unfortunate, but it is our reality. The second thing I said was, is to have the patience to keep showing up. And the third thing I would say is have good, I said this, around the resilience in the work generally, but I'll say this around here too, is have good friends. Right. And I think it's more and more possible today than it was even a decade ago. A decade ago, you could count on your hand, like how many women speakers there were, how many women leaders there were, et cetera. Today, there are dozens. Like, it really is that there are subgroups of like religious female leaders and activist female leaders and speaker female leaders. And there are support systems for each of them. I mean, even among like young women, young Muslim women who are elected to office, like they have a support group among themselves, as I understand it. And so there are a lot of opportunities to ask someone to hold your, I don't want to say hold your hand, but to like hold
support. Yeah. Yeah. Be a support, be a guide. And I love that. And so I know we can speak around one of your more challenging experiences going through this and really testing your grit, your resilience was the whole, I guess it was debacle with the Women's March and kind of what you went through with that. So again, where does, I think, speaking to how are you able to bounce back? How are you continuing to able to have these challenges that are thrown in front of you and then you're able to overcome them? Again, if you could speak to that.
I mean, it's funny, right? Because it's like I try to be really clear about how privileged I am. Like, that's how I come to this work. I'm a U.S. citizen. I am not fearful of deportation. My family is now middle class. Like, I've never, ever worried about being unhoused or hungry, right? And so a lot of times, like, I come to this work thinking about, like, okay, I have all these privileges. What do I do, right? Well, one of the privileges that I think I sometimes have a blind spot about is I am privileged to be in this work, right? I'm in a senior leadership role in this work. I have a great organization that supports me. We tell young people, you don't do this for the titles and the accolades. But when we say that, I have titles and accolades, so it's easy for me to say that. And so with the Women's March debacle, and for listeners who aren't familiar, I think the young kids, like, I like to preface this by saying young kids say TLDR, too long, didn't read, right? The TLDR on the Women's March debacle is that the founders of that board transitioned. So our sister Linda and others transitioned from the board. A new board was vetted and came in. I was part of that new board. And 2 days after the new board was publicly announced, following a massive Islamophobic and Zionist smear campaign, the new board voted to remove me from the board. And I had to have, the conversations of like, well, how will we ever talk about reproductive rights if we're always talking about Palestine, or we're pro-Palestine, but we're not anti-Israel. Those kinds of like really problematic, like progressive except Palestine kind of sentiments that, were heart-wrenching. And I kept thinking throughout that whole, that process of like being voted off and then the fallout, that I keep saying I do this work, irrespective of power, position, or accolades. And here I am having my position and accolades taken from me because of some of what I have done in advancing justice or in support of justice for Palestinians. And, I could cower, I could apologize, I could like go ring the pro-Israel bell, or I could own that I too would be tested as to the integrity of my teaching and my advocacy, right? Because I have the privilege of having the titles. What happens when the titles get taken away? Do I still advocate, right? And so part of sticking that out was about just being true to my principles. The other thing that I come back to is something that I said earlier is that, so not that. Someone reminded me throughout that whole thing, and we know this, right, is that Allah tells us in the Quran, you may love something and it's good for you, and it's bad for you. You may love something and it's bad for you, and you may hate something and it's good for you. Right? And I kept thinking that. So one of my peers, he texted me that, and he's like, just remember it. And I was like, when you really own that, Like if you can really own that you may hate something and it is good for you, it actually helps you not hate it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like all of a sudden it's not so tragic to have lost that position because I can accept that maybe this is good for me and only Allah knows. And so the theme throughout is this like constant, I have to remember, and, you know, and I don't want to like give your listeners like the perception that I have like arrived and my faith is solid and it never shakes. I struggle with all of these things, right? But really just having faith that I'm not in it for this life. I'm not in it for these positions or these recognitions. And just because I can't, like, I have to remember that even when I think I hate it, that I don't have the full picture, right? Like Allah knows what I do not know. And so you get up and you get back to work. And the other thing I thought about, really unrelated, sorry, my thoughts are unorganized because it's like approaching iftar time now, is this like, the Palestinians have lost so much, right? Like, I think, like I say this often, is that I choose my liberty over theirs. Like every time I pay my taxes, I choose my freedom over theirs. Like I'm not going to jail, but you know what? They're less free because I paid my taxes. And so when like I put my loss of some position, some title, some access, even some reputation, like I lost those things in that debacle. Mm-hmm. But like by comparison, I didn't lose any limbs. Like I didn't lose my freedom to move. I didn't lose my freedom to speak. And so like, who am I to complain? Yeah.
I mean, Jazakallah khair for sharing. I mean, that's I think the most important lessons and I mean, an incredible amount of ability to just have challenges and you know, just overcome them, right? Faith, support systems, being determined, continuing to struggle, knowing that there's sacrifice. So I mean, there's some really powerful lessons, and I appreciate you sharing all that. And I know every single one of them, or every single challenge, it's got its different scope. Some things on a national scene, and some things at a local masjid. But when they all accumulate, you know, people don't see all of them accumulating. And I think really appreciate the story and the sacrifice and everything you've done. And I think that's something for people to really look up to, and I appreciate you sharing that.
No, and I was also fortunate to have really good mentors in that process, right? Who said, like, I say this only because you said like look up to, is that I also have people I look up to who make sacrifices, who are principled, who support me through these things. And so I would encourage people who are, you know, who are embarking on really courageous activism to, you know, again and again, and we say this, is to have that support system of people that, not only people who hold them, but people that they look up to.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair. I'll leave you just kind of leaving your last thoughts or advice to young community leaders, young community activists. I know you've given a lot. Is there, like, if you could speak to people that are out there just trying to do their best, looking up to Zahra, looking up to different leaders that we have, what is just kind of that one takeaway advice that you'd give them?
So, I did MSA when I was in college, and I was on the board of MSA West, which is like our regional statewide conglomerate of MSAs. And we have this annual conference at the beginning of each year. And mashallah, it brings in like close to 1,000 students from across the state. And so this must have been 2005. I was prepping for the conference, and in the thick of it, like the registration, the marketing, like the speakers, like everything just has to like align in that like 2 weeks prior. Can't sleep, really stressed out. Every small issue feels like a really big issue. Like we're all really irritable, like all that stuff. Yeah. And one of the then advisors to that board that I was on reached out to me and he said, are you enjoying this? And I was like, no, I'm stressed. And he was like, well, like, make sure you take a moment to like stop, breathe, reflect, and be grateful and enjoy the work that you're in, because you are in this like really unique position. Not everybody has the privilege of being able to serve their community, of having found a home in activism, of making a difference in their masjid, their MSA, or whatever it may be for your individual listeners. So take time to stop, breathe, be grateful and enjoy. Like, you don't know that you have tomorrow, right? Make the most of Allah, like
using
you, like bringing this opportunity to your door. And when we can appreciate the magnitude of that, at least for me, I find that it helps the small things fade away.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's wonderfully put. And I think you tied it up really tremendously. Jazakallah khair again for your time. I really, I think very profound advice, amazing insights, an amazing journey, an amazing struggle. And we hope and pray that Allah that accepts from you, continues to give you strength. I think one of my favorite quotes is, by Umar radiallahu anhu, where he says, I don't ask that Allah lightens my burden, I ask Allah makes my back strong. So we ask Allah to make your back strong, to allow you to continue to carry tremendous responsibility on you and all the amazing individuals working with you and with CAIR in the Bay Area and across the country. And we really appreciate your time. Jazakallah khairan for everything.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Oaktree Institute Podcast. For more episodes, subscribe and follow us on Apple, Google Play, and Spotify. And for other content that we have, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.